Elena Zimmerman stood frozen in the doorway of her barn, lantern light trembling in her grip as the acrid smell hit her nostrils like a physical blow. The hay bales she had spent all summer carefully storing and preserving for the brutal Montana winter ahead were scattered across the barn floor, and even from where she stood, she could see the telltale discoloration and smell the chemical poison that had been poured over months of backbreaking work. It was October 1882, and without those bales, her cattle would starve before spring thawed the frozen ground. Her knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them in place, refusing to give whoever did this the satisfaction of breaking her, even though they were not there to see it. She had worked this ranch alone for 3 years since her father passed, and she had survived drought, harsh winters, and the loneliness that came with being a single woman trying to make it in Bozeman, Montana. But this felt different. This was deliberate cruelty, and as the reality settled into her bones, anger began to replace the initial shock. She set the lantern down carefully and walked among the ruined bales, her boots crunching on scattered hay. The poison had been thorough, systematic. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and wanted to ensure maximum damage. Her hands shook as she examined the extent of the destruction, calculating in her mind how much money she did not have to replace this feed, how many cattle she would have to sell at a loss before winter to avoid watching them starve. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. Crying would not save her ranch or her livelihood. The sound of hoofbeats outside made her spin around, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she kept near the barn door. Her heart hammered as she gripped the cold metal, wondering if the person responsible had returned to finish whatever twisted plan they had started. But the voice that called out was unfamiliar, deep and careful in a way that suggested its owner knew exactly how frightening it could be for a woman alone to have a stranger approach in the dark. "Miss Zimmerman, I saw your light burning late and wanted to make sure everything was all right. It is Quinn Kane from the Triple K spread east of here." Elena knew the name vaguely. The Kane Ranch had been established about 2 years ago by a cowboy who had worked cattle drives from Texas up through Montana before settling down. She had never met him personally, but she had heard he ran an honest operation and kept to himself mostly. She lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it within easy reach as she stepped to the barn entrance. The man who dismounted from a large bay gelding was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath his worn hat. Even in the dim light, she could see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes, which were a striking gray-blue that seemed to catch and hold the lantern light. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life working with animals and the land, but there was a gentleness in how he approached that made her grip on the rifle relax just a fraction more. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. "I appreciate the concern, but everything is fine here." His eyes moved past her to the barn interior, and she saw his expression shift from concern to something harder, more dangerous. "That does not look fine to me, Miss Zimmerman. That looks like someone poisoned your winter feed." The blunt assessment stripped away her thin veneer of control, and she felt her throat tighten. "It is my problem to handle." "Maybe so," he said quietly, stepping closer but stopping when he saw her tense. "But out here we look out for our neighbors. That is how we all survive. May I take a look?" "I have dealt with poisoned feed before, and I might be able to tell you what was used and possibly who might have access to it." Elena wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to her independence and handle this herself, but practicality won over pride. If he could help her identify who did this, she would have a better chance of making them pay and possibly recovering some of her losses. She nodded stiffly and gestured him inside. Quinn moved through the barn with careful attention, examining the bales, sniffing the poison, even tasting a tiny amount on his fingertip before spitting it out decisively. Arsenic solution mixed with something else, maybe strychnine. This is not amateur work. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and wanted to make sure no animal could eat this hay without dying. That is a comfort, Elena said bitterly. He looked at her directly, and she was struck by the intensity in his gaze. I am going to help you figure out who did this. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. You do not know me. This is not your fight. Because it is the right thing to do, he said simply. And because I know what it is like to have someone try to destroy everything you have worked for. I will not stand by and watch it happen to someone else if I can help. Something in his voice told her this was not just empty words or masculine posturing. There was a weight of experience behind his statement, old pain that had been carefully locked away but not forgotten. Against her better judgment, Elena felt herself beginning to trust this stranger who had appeared at possibly the worst moment of her life. I cannot pay you, she said quietly. I did not ask you to. He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. But we should move fast. Whoever did this probably expected you to not discover it until it was too late to do anything about it. The fact that you found it tonight gives us an advantage. They will not expect you to fight back so quickly. Where do we start? Quinn's expression turned calculating. We start by figuring out who benefits from you losing your ranch, who has been pressuring you to sell, who wants your land or your water rights. Elena's mind immediately went to one person, Marcus Holloway. He owns the big spread west of here, and he has been trying to buy me out since my father died. He says a woman has no business running a cattle operation alone. Holloway, Quinn repeated, his jaw tightening. I have had my own run-ins with him. He tried to claim some of my water rights last year, said the previous owner had agreed to share the creek that runs through both properties. Took a trip to the county office and a lawyer to prove he was lying. So you think he could have done this? I think he is capable of it, but we need proof. Accusing a man like Holloway without evidence will only make things worse for you. He settled his hat back on his head. It is late now, but tomorrow I will ride into town and ask some questions. Meanwhile, you need to secure your property. Do you have anywhere else to store hay if we can get you more? There is an old shed on the north side of my property, but it would need repairs. I will bring some men over tomorrow to help fix it up. And Miss Zimmerman, he paused at the barn entrance. Do not eat or drink anything you did not prepare yourself, and keep that rifle close. If someone is willing to poison your cattle feed, they might be willing to do worse. The warning sent a chill down her spine, but she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Kane. Quinn, he corrected gently. If we are going to be working together to catch whoever did this, we might as well be on first-name terms. And I will call you Elena, if that is acceptable. It is acceptable, she found herself saying. And for the first time since discovering the poisoned hay, she felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she would not lose everything after all. He mounted his horse with fluid grace and tipped his hat to her, before riding off into the darkness. Elena stood in the barn doorway long after the sound of hoofbeats had faded, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. A stranger had appeared and offered help without asking for anything in return, and more surprisingly, she had accepted. That was not like her. She had built walls around herself after her father's death, determined to prove she could handle everything alone. But something about Quinn Kane had slipped past those defenses with unsettling ease. She forced herself to complete a thorough check of the rest of her property, before returning to the small ranch house she called home. Sleep seemed impossible, but she made herself lie down on the bed. Her mother had brought West as a new bride 30 years ago. Her mind raced with questions and fears, and if she was honest with herself, thoughts about the cowboy who had promised to help her. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in a very long time. Morning came too soon, and brought with it a crisp autumn chill that promised an early winter. Elena forced down some breakfast, and was attempting to calculate how much money she had saved, when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Her hand went to her rifle again until she looked out the window and saw Quinn riding at the head of a small group of men, wagons loaded with lumber and tools trailing behind. She stepped out onto the porch as they pulled up to her yard. Quinn dismounted and walked toward her, and in the full light of day, she could see him more clearly. He was probably around 30, with weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was serious. There was a scar along his jawline, thin and white with age, and she found herself wondering what story lay behind it. "Brought some help," he said unnecessarily. "Figured we could get that shed fixed up today and start asking questions in town this afternoon. I told you I cannot pay for this. And I told you I did not ask you to." His tone was patient but firm. "Elena, out here we help each other. Today it is your turn to receive help. Tomorrow it might be my turn to need it. That is how community works." She wanted to argue, but the practical part of her brain recognized that she needed this help desperately. "Thank you," she said instead, the words feeling inadequate for what he was offering. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Quinn's men worked efficiently, and Elena found herself impressed by how well he led them, giving clear instructions without being harsh or demanding. He worked as hard as any of them, and she caught herself watching the way he moved, the strength in his arms as he lifted heavy beams into place, the concentration on his face as he hammered nails with precise strikes. She forced herself to focus on her own work, preparing lunch for the crew, and trying to sort through her financial situation. But her eyes kept drifting back to Quinn, and once or twice she caught him looking at her too, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary, before they both looked away, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. By early afternoon, the shed was repaired and reinforced, ready to hold new hay if they could acquire it. Quinn wiped sweat from his brow and sent his men back to the Triple K with instructions for the afternoon work there. Then he turned to Elena, who was washing dishes from lunch at the pump outside her kitchen. "Ready to ride into town?" he asked. She dried her hands on her apron. "Let me change into riding clothes." When she emerged 15 minutes later in a practical split skirt and jacket, he had her horse saddled and waiting alongside his own. They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, the Montana landscape stretching around them in shades of gold and brown as autumn claimed the grasslands. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with snow that would soon spread down to the valleys. "You said you had experience with someone trying to destroy what you built," Elena said finally, breaking the silence. "What happened?" Quinn was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "I had a ranch in Wyoming with my brother. We had worked for 5 years to build it up from nothing. Then a big cattle outfit decided they wanted our land. When we would not sell, they started a campaign to drive us out. Burned our hay, stampeded our cattle, even shot at us a few times. My brother Daniel was killed during one of those attacks. By the time I proved who was behind it and got the law involved, I had lost everything. So I came to Montana and started over. I am so sorry," Elena said, and she meant it deeply. The pain in his voice was old but still raw in places, and she understood that kind of grief all too well. "It is why I will not stand by and watch it happen to you," he said, looking at her directly. "You deserve better than to lose your ranch to someone's greed." They reached Bozeman as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The town was bustling with afternoon activity. Miners and ranchers and businessmen moving along the wooden sidewalks, horses and wagons filling the wide main street. Quinn led her to the general store first, where he questioned the owner, Mr. Peterson, about recent purchases of rat poison or other substances that could be used to contaminate feed. The older man scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Well now, let me think. I sold some arsenic to Mrs. Henderson about 3 weeks ago for her rat problem. And there was a big order of strychnine that went out to the Holloway Ranch maybe 2 months back. They said it was for wolves that had been troubling their herds." Elena and Quinn exchanged glances. "How much strychnine?" Quinn asked casually. "Enough to kill every wolf in Montana twice over," Mr. Peterson said. "Seemed excessive to me, but Marcus Holloway is not a man you question if you want to keep his business." They thanked him and stepped back outside. "That is not proof," Elena said quietly. "No, but it is a connection. Let us see what else we can find." They spent the next 2 hours talking to various people in town. The blacksmith remembered one of Holloway's hands, asking detailed questions about how to neutralize the smell of poison about 3 weeks ago. The bartender at the Silver Dollar Saloon mentioned that several of Holloway's men had been drinking heavily one night and making comments about how the Zimmerman ranch would be available soon. Each piece of information individually might mean nothing, but together they painted a damning picture. As evening approached, Quinn suggested they get dinner at the small restaurant near the hotel before heading back. Elena realized she had not eaten in a proper restaurant in months, always too busy or too worried about money to indulge. But Quinn insisted, and she found herself sitting across from him at a corner table, suddenly very aware that this felt less like a business meeting and more like something else entirely. "You have been running your ranch alone for 3 years?" Quinn asked after they had ordered. "Yes. My father taught me everything about cattle and ranching. He never had a son, so I became his partner instead of just his daughter. When he died, some people expected me to sell and move back east where I had relatives. But this is my home. I was not going to let it go without a fight." "You are stronger than most men I know," Quinn said, and there was admiration in his voice that made warmth spread through her chest. "I do not feel strong right now. I feel scared and angry and overwhelmed." "That is what strength looks like sometimes," he said quietly. "It is not about never being afraid. It is about facing the fear and doing what needs to be done anyway." Their food arrived, and they ate while talking more easily now, the conversation flowing from ranching to books to their childhoods. Elena learned that Quinn had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had been working cattle since he was tall enough to sit a horse. He spoke fondly of his late brother Daniel, and she could hear the love and grief woven together in his words. She found herself sharing stories about her father, about her mother who had died when Elena was 12, about the loneliness of the past 3 years and the determination that kept her going. "I have not talked this much to anyone in months," she admitted as they finished their meal. "I know what you mean," Quinn said. "Ranching can be isolating. You get so focused on the work that you forget there is more to life than just surviving." Their eyes met across the table, and Elena felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition that this connection forming between them was more than just shared circumstances or mutual assistance. She saw the same awareness reflected in Quinn's eyes, along with something that looked like longing carefully held in check. The moment was broken by a loud voice from the doorway. "Well, well, Elena Zimmerman, I heard you might be having some trouble out at your place." Marcus Holloway stood in the entrance to the restaurant, flanked by two of his ranch hands. He was a big man in his 50s, with a thick mustache and cold eyes that swept over Elena with casual dismissal, before landing on Quinn with barely concealed hostility. "Holloway," Quinn said evenly, not standing but positioning himself in a way that suggested he was ready to if necessary. "Kane, I should have known you would stick your nose into business that does not concern you. You seem to make a habit of that." "Helping a neighbor is always my business," Quinn replied, his voice deceptively calm. Holloway's attention returned to Elena. "I want you to know, Miss Zimmerman, that my offer still stands. I will pay you a fair price for your ranch, more than fair considering the difficulties you seem to be experiencing. It would save you a lot of heartache to accept now before things get worse." The implicit threat in his words was clear, and Elena felt her temper flare. She stood, meeting Holloway's gaze directly. "My ranch is not for sale, Mr. Holloway. Not now, not ever. And if I find out you had anything to do with my poisoned hay, I will make sure everyone in Montana territory knows what kind of man you really are." Holloway's face darkened. "Be careful with accusations, girl. You are in a precarious position and you do not want to make enemies of people who could help you." "She already has help," Quinn said, standing now to his full height, which put him eye to eye with Holloway. "And if anything else happens to her property or her animals, you will answer to me personally." The tension in the restaurant was thick enough to cut. Other diners had stopped eating to watch the confrontation, and Elena could feel multiple eyes on them. Holloway's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment she thought violence might erupt right there. But then he smiled, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. Big talk from a man who could not even protect his own brother, but sure, play the hero for the pretty lady. "We will see how long that lasts when winter really sets in and she is desperate." He turned on his heel and strode out, his men following. Elena saw Quinn's jaw clench, the muscle jumping with suppressed emotion. She touched his arm gently. "He is trying to provoke you, do not let him." Quinn took a slow breath and nodded. "You are right, but we need to be more careful now. He knows we are investigating, which makes him more dangerous." They paid for their meal and stepped out into the darkening street. The temperature had dropped significantly, and Elena pulled her jacket tighter. Quinn walked close beside her as they moved toward where they had left their horses, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip, eyes scanning the shadows. "I should ride back with you," he said. "Make sure you get home safely. That would take you hours out of your way." "I do not care." His voice was firm. "Elena, I meant what I said to Holloway. If anything happens to you, I would never forgive myself." The protectiveness in his tone made her heart beat faster. "All right," she agreed softly. The ride back to her ranch was quiet, both of them alert for any signs of trouble. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the landscape and turning the grasslands into a study in shadows. Elena found herself acutely aware of Quinn's presence beside her, the solid reality of him, the way he kept positioning his horse slightly ahead of hers, as if to shield her from any potential threat. When they reached her property, he insisted on checking the barn and shed before allowing her to go inside her house. Everything appeared undisturbed, but Elena still felt uneasy. Quinn must have sensed it because he hesitated before mounting his horse to leave. "I could sleep in your barn tonight if you would feel safer," he offered. "I do not want you to be uncomfortable, but I also do not like the idea of you here alone after that confrontation with Holloway." Elena knew she should refuse, knew that having a man stay overnight on her property would cause talk if anyone found out. But she also knew that she would feel safer with Quinn nearby, and practicality won over propriety for the second time since meeting him. The barn would be cold. "There is a spare room in the house that was my father's. You could stay there." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise and pleasure and careful respect all mixed together. "If you are sure, I am sure." She set him up in her father's old room, which still held his simple bed and dresser. It felt strange having someone else in the house, but also comforting in a way she had not expected. They said goodnight awkwardly, both hyper-aware of the situation, before retreating to their separate rooms. Elena lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling, knowing that Quinn was just down the hall. She thought about how much her life had changed in less than 24 hours, how a disaster had somehow brought this man into her world, and how quickly he had become important to her. It was dangerous to feel this way, to let someone past her defenses so rapidly. But there was something about Quinn that felt inevitable, as if meeting him had been written into her fate long before poisoned hay had given him a reason to appear. Morning brought the sound of movement in the kitchen, and Elena emerged from her room to find Quinn had started coffee and was examining her nearly empty pantry with a concerned expression. "We need to get you into town for supplies," he said. "And we need to figure out how to replace that poisoned hay. I have been thinking about it all night. I can spare some from my own stores to get you through the next few weeks, and there is a ranch up north that might have extra to sell. Quinn, you are doing too much already." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Elena, I need you to understand something. This is not charity, and it is not just about being neighborly anymore. I care about what happens to you. I know we just met, and I know this is probably too fast, but I cannot pretend I do not feel what I am feeling." Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you feeling?" He crossed the kitchen to stand in front of her, close enough that she could see the gray flecks in his blue eyes, the sincerity written across his face. "That you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. That I want to help you not because you need help, but because I want to be part of your life. That somewhere between finding your poisoned hay and watching you stand up to Holloway last night, I started falling for you." Elena's heart was racing. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was too fast, too intense, too risky. But her heart, which had been locked away for so long, was saying something entirely different. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I did not want to, because it is terrifying and complicated and the timing is terrible. But I feel it too." Quinn reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hand. "Then let me help you fight this. Not as a stranger or even just a friend, but as someone who wants to build something with you. Someone who sees a future that might include both our ranches and both our dreams." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the warmth and tenderness of it. "Yes," she said simply. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and full of hope. Then he leaned down and kissed her softly, a gentle press of lips that held promise and possibility and the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. When they pulled apart, Elena felt steadier than she had in days, as if sharing this burden with Quinn had somehow made it lighter. They had coffee and made plans for the day, falling into an easy partnership that felt natural and right. Over the next week, Quinn became a constant presence at Elena's ranch. He brought hay from his own stores and helped her source more from other ranchers. He used his contacts to quietly gather more information about Holloway's activities. And through it all, the connection between them deepened. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings they would sit on her porch and talk about everything and nothing, gradually learning each other's histories and hopes and fears. Elena discovered that Quinn loved reading but rarely had time for it, so she loaned him books from her small collection, and they discussed them over coffee in the mornings. Quinn learned that Elena had a beautiful singing voice but was self-conscious about it, so he coaxed her into singing while they worked, claiming it made the horses calmer. They were building something real and solid, a foundation that went deeper than just physical attraction, though there was plenty of that too in the stolen kisses and longing looks they exchanged. It was during the second week that they finally got the proof they needed. One of Quinn's ranch hands, a young man named Timothy, came riding up to Elena's place in the late afternoon, his face flushed with excitement and righteous anger. "Boss, I found something," he said, dismounting quickly. "I was in town picking up supplies, and I overheard two of Holloway's men talking in the alley behind the saloon. They were arguing because one of them did not get paid what he was promised for poisoning Miss Zimmerman's hay. The other one told him to shut up about it, that Holloway would kill them both if anyone found out. I stayed hidden and listened to the whole thing. They described exactly how they did it when they did it, everything." Quinn's face went hard. "Will you testify to what you heard?" "Yes, sir." What they did was not right. Elena felt a rush of vindication and relief. "We have to take this to the sheriff." "Agreed," Quinn said. "But we need to be smart about it. Holloway has influence in town. We need to make sure the sheriff has enough to act on before Holloway can intimidate witnesses or bribe his way out of trouble." They spent the evening planning their approach, and the next morning they rode into Bozeman together with Timothy. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 60s named John Porter, listened to their story with increasing interest and concern. He was one of the few lawmen in Montana who had a reputation for fairness and could not be bought, which was why Quinn had insisted they bring their evidence to him rather than trying to handle it themselves. "This is serious," Sheriff Porter said when they had finished. "If I can get one of those ranch hands to turn on Holloway, I can arrest him, but it will be tricky. Men like Holloway do not go down easy." "What do you need from us?" Quinn asked. "Let me handle it from here. I will bring in those ranch hands for questioning separately, play them against each other. One of them will break. In the meantime, Miss Zimmerman, I suggest you stay with friends in town for a few days, just to be safe." Elena shook her head. "I will not be driven from my home." "Then I will stay with her," Quinn said firmly. "Post a deputy at her property if you can spare one, and we will keep watch ourselves." The sheriff agreed reluctantly, and they left his office with the sense that things were finally moving toward resolution. But Elena could not shake the feeling that Holloway would not go quietly, that there would be one more confrontation before this was over. She was right. 2 nights later, Elena woke to the sound of horses and men's voices outside her house. Quinn was already up, pistol in hand, looking out the window carefully. "It is Holloway and at least 6 men," he said quietly. "Stay inside and keep down." But Elena grabbed her rifle and moved to the window opposite him. "This is my fight too." Before Quinn could argue, Holloway's voice rang out. "Zimmerman, Kane, I know you went crying to the sheriff with your lies. That was a mistake. Come out here and we will settle this the old way." Quinn's jaw clenched. "He is trying to provoke us into a gunfight. If we go out there, he will claim self-defense when his men kill us both. So what do? We wait for the law. I sent word to Sheriff Porter this afternoon that something might happen tonight. He should be here soon with deputies." They held their position, refusing to respond to Holloway's increasingly angry demands. Elena could see shadows moving around the property, and she knew Holloway's men were positioning themselves for an assault. Her hands were sweating on the rifle stock, but she kept her breathing steady, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. Then a shot rang out, shattering one of the windows. Quinn returned fire immediately, aiming high to warn rather than to kill. More shots followed, and Elena found herself firing too, protecting her home and the man beside her with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. The gunfight lasted only a few minutes before the sound of many horses approaching made Holloway's men hesitate. Sheriff Porter rode in with 8 armed deputies, lanterns blazing, and suddenly Holloway found himself surrounded and outgunned. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff commanded. "Marcus Holloway, you are under arrest for destruction of property, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Your ranch hands already confessed everything. It is over." The fight went out of Holloway's men immediately. They dropped their guns and put their hands up, unwilling to die for a boss who had already been exposed. Holloway himself looked around wildly, as if calculating whether he could shoot his way out, but Quinn stepped onto the porch with his pistol leveled steadily at the older man's chest. "It is over," Quinn repeated. "You lost. Take it like a man." Holloway's face twisted with rage and defeat. "You think you have won. You are just a drifter who could not save his own brother, and she is a woman playing at ranching. You deserve each other." "You are right," Elena said, stepping out to stand beside Quinn. "We do deserve each other. And we are going to build something good and lasting while you rot in a prison cell." Sheriff Porter's men took Holloway and his crew into custody. As they rode away, Elena felt the tension drain from her body all at once, leaving her shaking with reaction. Quinn holstered his pistol and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly while she trembled against his chest. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe. It is really over." She held on to him, drawing strength from his solid presence, from the steady beat of his heart against her ear. "I could not have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," he said, pulling back to look at her. "But I am glad you did not have to. Elena, I meant what I said before. I want a future with you. I want to combine our ranches, build something bigger and stronger together. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want everything with you." Elena looked up at this man who had appeared in her darkest moment and become her partner, her protector, and the person she had fallen deeply in love with. "I want that too, all of it." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, celebrating survival and victory and the love that had bloomed between them in the midst of chaos. The trial of Marcus Holloway was the talk of Montana Territory for months. His ranch hands testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences, describing in detail how he had planned and ordered the poisoning of Elena's hay, as part of a scheme to force her to sell at a fraction of her property's value. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and his ranch was sold at auction to pay restitution to Elena and other ranchers he had wronged over the years. Quinn and Elena used some of the restitution money to purchase additional cattle and expand their combined operation. They were married in the spring of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Bozeman, with the whole community turning out to celebrate. Elena wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Quinn wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. When they exchanged vows, their voices were steady and sure, speaking promises they both intended to keep for the rest of their lives. They combined their ranches officially, creating one of the larger and more successful operations in the region. Quinn brought his knowledge of cattle drives and markets, while Elena's meticulous record-keeping and understanding of sustainable grazing practices made them a formidable team. They worked side by side every day, partners in every sense of the word, building something that was greater than the sum of its parts. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with snow piling up past the windows and temperatures dropping so low that water froze solid within minutes of being drawn from the well. But inside their home, there was warmth and love and laughter. They spent long evenings reading together by the fire, planning their future, talking about the children they hoped to have, and the legacy they wanted to leave. Elena discovered she was pregnant in the fall of 1883, and Quinn's joy was almost overwhelming. He became even more protective, constantly worried about her health and the health of their baby. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, understanding that his fear came from having already lost so much in his life. She made sure he knew every day that she was strong and healthy, and that their baby would be fine. Their son was born in May of 1884, arriving after a long labor that left Elena exhausted but triumphant. They named him Daniel, after Quinn's late brother, and when Quinn held his son for the first time, tears streamed down his face as he whispered promises to love and protect this tiny life with everything he had. Watching him with their son, Elena fell in love with her husband all over again, seeing the gentleness and devotion he brought to fatherhood. He was a natural with the baby, never complaining about sleepless nights or dirty diapers, always eager to hold and rock and sing to their boy. Elena would often find them together, Quinn walking the floor with Daniel against his shoulder, humming old cowboy songs and talking to him about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when he was older. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They hired good hands, treating them fairly and earning loyalty that translated into hard work and dedication. Elena's reputation as a savvy rancher spread, and people stopped questioning whether a woman could run a cattle operation when the results spoke for themselves. Quinn's steady leadership and Elena's sharp business mind made them respected throughout Montana, and they used that influence to help other small ranchers resist pressure from bigger outfits trying to consolidate land and power. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter they named Margaret after Elena's mother, born in 1886, and another son they named Thomas, born in 1888. Their home was filled with noise and love and the constant activity of children growing up on a working ranch. Quinn taught his sons and daughter to ride almost before they could walk, and Elena made sure all 3 children could read and write and figure numbers, determined that they would have education as well as practical skills. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Quinn and Elena would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other so deeply that words were often unnecessary. Sometimes they would talk about how far they had come from that terrible night when Elena had discovered her poisoned hay, marveling at how disaster had brought them together and forged a love that had weathered every storm. "You ever regret it?" Elena asked one evening when they had been married for 7 years. "Taking on my problems when you barely knew me, you could have had a peaceful life." Quinn looked at her with such love and certainty that it took her breath away even after all this time. Not for a single moment. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children and this life we built together. If I could go back and change anything, I would not. Even losing Daniel. Your brother, I mean." His expression grew solemn. "I will always grieve for my brother. But his death taught me not to waste time or take love for granted. When I met you, I recognized something precious, and I was not going to let fear or caution make me miss it. So no, I would not change anything, because it all led me to you." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I love you, Quinn Kane." "I love you too, Elena Kane. Always." They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other in darkness and built a life filled with light. The ranch stretched around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and partnership. Their children slept safely inside, growing strong and loved. And the future, which had once seemed so uncertain and frightening, now held nothing but promise. Years continued to pass, bringing changes but not diminishing the love between Quinn and Elena. Their children grew into capable young adults who loved the ranch and understood the value of hard work and integrity. Daniel, their eldest, had his father's steadiness and his mother's business sense. Margaret inherited Elena's fierce independence and Quinn's gentle heart. Thomas was the dreamer of the family, always reading and asking questions about the world beyond Montana, though he loved the ranch as much as his siblings. Quinn and Elena aged together gracefully, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun and wind. But they still looked at each other with the same love and desire they had felt as young people falling in love in the midst of crisis. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses in the barn when they thought no one was watching, still talked late into the night about everything and nothing. The ranch became known as the Kane Ranch, one of the most successful in Montana, but also one of the most generous. Quinn and Elena never forgot what it was like to struggle, to face forces beyond their control, to need help, and have it offered freely. They employed anyone willing to work hard regardless of background, paid fair wages, and were known for helping neighbors in trouble without expecting repayment. They had built not just a ranch, but a legacy of decency and community that would outlast them. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, their children and grandchildren, ranch hands and neighbors and friends from across Montana gathered to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing, stories told and memories shared. But the moment Elena treasured most came late in the evening when she and Quinn slipped away from the party to stand in the barn where it had all begun, where he had first found her surrounded by poisoned hay and offered his help without hesitation. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me that night, for staying when you could have ridden away, for building this life with me, for loving me every single day for 20 years. Quinn pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had become as familiar as her own. "It has been my greatest honor and my greatest joy," he said. "You took a broken man who had lost everything and gave him a reason to believe in the future again. You are my heart, Elena. You always will be." They stood together in the shadows of the barn, surrounded by the sounds of celebration drifting from the house, holding each other as they had through countless trials and triumphs. The hay bales stacked neatly in the barn were clean and fresh, evidence of preparation for another winter that would come and go as all winters did, leaving them still standing, still together, still in love. The poison that had threatened to destroy Elena's livelihood had instead brought her the greatest gift of her life. In trying to break her, her enemy had inadvertently led her to the man who would stand beside her through everything, who would help her build something beautiful and lasting, who would love her with a constancy and depth that made every hardship worthwhile. It was not the story she had expected her life to tell, but it was a story she would not trade for anything in the world. Quinn and Elena Kane lived long, full lives surrounded by family and friends, respected and loved throughout Montana. They worked their ranch together, until age and health forced them to turn over day-to-day operations to their children, but they remained partners in every way until the very end. When Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Elena held his hand and whispered her love one last time. She followed him less than a year later, unwilling to spend too long in a world without him. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, the mountains rising in the distance, the grasslands stretching toward the horizon. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, telling stories of their love and their strength and the legacy they had built together. The Kane Ranch continued to thrive under new generations, but everyone who worked the land or lived in the house understood that it was founded on something more than business sense or hard work. It was built on love that had conquered fear and hardship, on partnership that had transformed two struggling ranches into something greater, on the courage to trust a stranger who appeared in a moment of crisis and became the love of a lifetime. The barn where Elena had discovered her poisoned hay and where Quinn had first offered his help stood for many decades, eventually replaced by a newer structure but never forgotten. The story was passed down through generations, told and retold, becoming part of family legend. It was a story about how disaster can lead to blessing, how strength comes in many forms, how love can bloom in the darkest moments and grow into something that lights up the world. It was a story about two people who found each other when they needed it most and chose each other every day after that, building a life that honored the best of what the Wild West could be. Opportunity and community, hard work and fierce loyalty, independence and partnership, courage and love that conquered all.